Wagner, a group of mercenaries secretly founded by Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin to solve the Kremlin's dirty work all over the world without Russia being held accountable. At the official level, both Vladimir Putin and the Russian authorities continuously deny all connection to Wagner's mercenaries, despite the more than suggestive evidence that directly links the paramilitary group to Putin and the Russian state.
They spotted him in Ukraine.
Below we will show you not only evidence that clearly indicates Wagner's connection with the Russian state, but also the cruelty that these mercenaries are capable of and how Russia chooses to act when it wants to intimidate. The Wagner Group, Putin's invisible hand, has its headquarters in the town of Molkino, Krasnodar district, from where it reaches all over the world. Wagner's mercenaries have been identified in Ukraine, Syria, Sudan, Libya, the Central African Republic, Venezuela, and even Madagascar, despite denials from Moscow.
Секцион, остановись!
It is interesting that in the same military base, the troops of the Brigade for Special Missions number 10 of GRU Chief Intelligence Office are being trained. Coincidence? Also, Wagner's equipment is identical to that of GRU troops, armored vehicles, heavy and light weapons. The transport of mercenaries is done by military planes of the Russian Ministry of Defense. The wounded mercenaries are treated in the military hospitals. But who are the Wagner mercenaries? They are former intelligence officers, mostly involved in the Crimean and Chechen War, known as war criminals, people who can no longer find themselves in a normality when they return from their theaters of operations and accept for little money to commit atrocities on behalf of Russia.
Столкнулся с бригадой парней, которые как раз относились к Вагнеру, то есть ЧВК Россия. Оттуда вы, парни, когда мы познакомились, увидели во мне таланты определенные и пригласили к себе на заработки. Соответственно, денег не имелось, и поэтому дал согласие.
Что нам главнее было? Конечно же, деньги. Все ищут легких денег, и мы подписались на это.
Officially, Wagner is a private military company that provides security consulting services.
Мы не имеем никакого отношения к ЧВК Вагнера. В любой стране могут работать люди по контракту, так же, как и работаем мы.
In reality, this is far from a commercial affair, but rather an instrument of influence for the Kremlin's geopolitical interests.
Теперь по поводу Вагнера и того, что люди делают. Все должны оставаться в рамках закона. Все. Если есть какая-то... Мы можем запретить вообще частную охранную деятельность.
Moreover, mercenaries are illegal in Russia, and the so-called private company does not appear in any document, register of legal entities, nor in the structure of the Russian Ministry of Defense. The European and American media consider Wagner to be one of the best trained and most efficient groups of mercenaries in the world. In fact, Wagner covers so-called gray zone, a buffer between war and peace. From the military doctrine of Russian General Valery Gerasimov, conducting black ops operations in areas of major geostrategic interest to Russia, such as Donbass, Crimea or Syria, where normally the Russian army would be under the constant supervision of the international community and have restricted freedom of movement.
Учат наводить, учат пользоваться вооружением, артиллерия, тем же самыми автоматами, иглами, танками, БМП.
But let's take them one at a time. Wagner founder Dmitry Utkin is a well-known figure. a war veteran who fought in both wars in Chechnya and who was decorated by Vladimir Putin for Russia's operations in Ukraine in 2014. But most importantly, perhaps, Utkin is a GRU reservist until 2013. He was an employee of GRU with the rank of lieutenant colonel, being the head of Spetsnaz unit. For those who do not know what Spetsnaz troops are, they are the special GRU fighter troops considered among the best trained and most violent troops in the world. Because he proved his military skills on the battlefield immediately after leaving the GRU in 2014, he founded the Wagner group, named after his code name as GRU fighter Wagner. In 2016, he was decorated by Putin with the Order of Courage for his services in Ukraine. According to Wagner members, Utkin is terribly cruel. He is interested in achieving his goals on the battlefield, no matter how many people have to die to achieve them. He is a very good strategist and prefers to surround himself with weak people who do not challenge his tactical decisions. For this reason, most Wagner commanders are poorly educated and trained, have a well below average IQ, and are only focused on making money no matter how they kill. Recently, a picture of Utkin with 2 Nazi tattoos appears in the press, indicating his ideological sympathies. Maybe for the rest of the world, tattoos have no meaning, but in Putin's Russia, anyone who has the courage to promote Nazi doctrines is demonized and is constantly reminded of the Russian Red Army's alleged contribution to the liberation of Europe from Nazism in World War II. However, in Putin's view, the end justifies the means, so regardless of the doctrines adopted, Wagner's fighters are good as long as they accomplish their goals. And the photo with Utkin's tattoos is of no surprise, because many Wagner's fighters are adherents for this Nazist ideology that Putin condemns and have tattoos or symbols in this regard. On both collarbones and chest, Utkin has tattooed the symbols of officers from the Waffen-SS unit, the armed group of Nazi party. As important is Evgenia Prigozhin, Wagner's financier. The controversial businessman started his business by providing catering for the Kremlin. That's why the Russian independent press calls him Putin's cook. It should be noted that Prigozhin is the leader of the so-called internet research agency, the Troll Factory, that was involved in the US presidential election campaign by providing extensive fake news. It is another way for Prigozhin to offer important services to Putin. The Ukrainian security agency has intercepted flights of Russian mercenaries to several destinations in Africa and the Middle East. What they managed to find out stunned an entire world. International travel passports were issued to mercenaries, and this is crucial, by the only passport office in Moscow that issued false IDs to undercover GRU officers. It is currently the strongest evidence of a link between the Russian ministry and the illegal private army. The Russian government not only tolerates Wagner's military operations around the world, but is also actively involved in facilitating such black operations. The Ukrainians also managed to track down the airline tickets of some mercenaries who traveled from Pashkovsky, the main airport in Krasnodar, which is located 30 minutes from the town of Molkino, where the Wagner base is located. At least 2,000 Wagner mercenaries fought in Syria and eastern Ukraine. It is extremely obvious that Vladimir Putin and the Russian state are behind the Wagner movement, which is just an annex of GRU. Clearly, the group is being used to deal with Moscow's dirty foreign affairs without the Kremlin's official involvement. Recently, Marat Gabidulin, a veteran of the Russian Air Force and former bodyguard, wrote a memoir, In the Same River Twice, about his history in the secret band Wagner, which he joined in 2015. I wrote this because I realized that it is time for our country to face the truth. Mercenaries exist. Mercenary groups exist everywhere, and we lie about them. As tensions with Ukraine have risen in recent months, Reuters reports that Russian mercenaries have been dispatched to eastern Ukraine. The American press wrote the Wagner soldiers are being moved from Africa, possibly to Ukraine. The previous links between Wagner and GRU were also proved by the 3 phone calls intercepted by Ukrainian intelligence service between Dmitry Utkin, GRU Colonel Oleg Ivannikov and Evgeny Nikiforov, Major General, Chief of Staff of the 58th Russian Army, in which Chief Wagners received operational guidelines for operations in Ukraine.
Там спокойно у вас или?
Да, все спокойно, я уже получил команду от Николаевича, сегодня ездил.
Отходи! Отходи! Отхожу уже! Принял за решение! Да, отхожу!
Russian mercenaries torture and kill prisoners. In Syria, Mohammed Taha Ismail al-Abdullah, a Syrian man, was caught mercilessly tortured and killed by Wagner Group mercenaries. The Syrian's hand and feet were crushed with a crowbar. His head and hands were cut off, while the mercenaries laughed and mocked the victim. The beheaded body was hung from his feet and burned. The head was hung from a nearby fence. The Russians of Wagner recorded a video on which the face of one of the mercenaries can be seen. Novaya Gazeta journalists were able to identify him with the software, a man named Stanislav D., and obtained a copy of the man's passport, as well as several other documents providing that he is an employee of the private military company Wagner.
Решать эту проблему, безусловно, нужно. И самостоятельно Сирия вряд ли с этим справится. Вы знаете, что и Россия одна с этим не справится. Поэтому мы готовы принимать в этом участие, но только в качестве одной из составляющих общих международных усилий.
UN experts have received reports of serious violation of human rights and violation of international humanitarian law by Wagner soldiers. These organize mass executions, detention, torture during interrogations and forced disappearances.
Пограничник кто? Ты? Да. Гордись. Свое? Нет.
And this video is proof that members of the private paramilitary company are liable to be prosecuted for crimes against humanity.
В четверг министр иностранных дел России Сергей Лавров выступил на заседании Совбеза ООН по безопасности в Африке. Отдельной темой стала Центральная Африканская Республика.
In 2018, 3 Russian freelance journalists were shot while filming a documentary about Wagner's operations in the country, trying to uncover Wagner's ties with the Russian state. The men were found dead outside the town of Sibut, located 188 kilometers north of the capital Bangui. Rastorguev, Radchenko and Jamal were caught in an ambush by gunmen who opened fire on the car they were in. In Libya, Wagner's mercenaries provided training, assisted artillery teams, guarded high-ranking officers, operated Russian Panzer air defense system and repaired military equipment. They also functioned as highly efficient snipers, installing fear in both the GNA forces and civilians.
Смотри, вспышка, смотри где. Смотри, вон, видишь вспышка? Смотри сейчас. Туда смотри.
According to some Wagner commanders, mercenaries who make mistakes during missions are severely punished by the commanders. They are put in boxes full of feces and left there for 2 days. It doesn't matter if some of them don't survive. As a result of the missions, many of the mercenaries died during foreign operations, and the number of those willing to join Wagner has dropped considerably in recent years. The few who join Wagners have problems with the law, or they have serious personality problems, violent people prone to torture other people.
У меня там было 3 знакомых. 2 из них погибли, не дойдя до самого города. Из роты штурмовой, где я был, 18 человек погибло.
Точную цифру я не назову, но приблизительно могу сказать, что человек 500-600 там осталось. И о них уже никто никогда не узнает.
Every year on Victory Day, Vladimir Putin's speech focuses on the idea of Russia as savior, the liberator of Europe from the fascist yoke, and blames Nazi ideology.
Именно советский народ принес свободу другим народам. Именно от нашего солдата нацисты и их пособники получили полное возмездие.
There is no difference between the way the Russian Red Army acted in the World War II and the way the Russian armed forces operate today, both of which use violence, deception, and have no respect for international law. Here are just a few examples. The occupation of Crimean Peninsula, the bombing of civilians in Syria, the military operations in the Donbas area, Georgia, the Wagner military operations in Africa or the Middle East. It is amazing how Putin uses mercenaries who have embraced Nazi ideology, although he has repeatedly stated that Russia is the one that saved Europe from Nazis. Although he has repeatedly stated that Russia is the one that saved Europe from Nazism. The slogan "Fight against fascism" was strongly promoted by the Russians in the campaign to attract volunteers to fight in Donbas against Ukrainian fascists. Putin has repeatedly called Ukraine a fascist state, and yet the Wagner mercenaries sent to the conflict in Donbas, Syria and Libya are themselves neo-Nazists.
Что очень важно, но и в Сирии, да и в других местах, очень важно, чтобы у всех участников этих процессов, у глобальных игроков, не было желания и соблазна использовать различные террористические, квазитеррористические, радикальные группировки для достижения своих сиюминутных политических целей.
Putin's hypocrisy, lies and arrogance knows no bounds. Although he publicly denies the Kremlin's links to PMC Wagner, criticizes and condemns the actions of Russian mercenaries, Putin casually decorates these psychopathic criminals for their courage and special merits. Lying and deception have become common tools for Kremlin's administrations. But it's time for Putin and his gang to take moral responsibility for the crimes Wagner's mercenaries committed against civilians in conflict zones.